Oh, Chulo, we good?
Yeah, we're on the air right now, man. Go for it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Welcome to the Papi and Chulo show. I am Papi. We got my friend Chulo over there in Cali, and here with us our second guest. We got. Could you introduce yourself?
I'm Matthew, not as cool as Papi or Chulo. Or we could go with Mateo, it's a little more spicy.
True that. And can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, Matt?
So I work as a clinical mental health counselor, and I've been doing that for almost 10 years now. I'm also on my way to finish my doctorate, so I'm doing that for counseling education. Yeah.
And just to tell the fans how we met each other, very appropriate for the attire that I have on, which is tied to the theme, I would say, but also tied to our roots, us, the trio right here. We met at Franciscan University for Matt's Muay Thai classes. It was perfect and exactly what I needed at my time. And you've also elaborated, Chulo, how important it was for you.
Yep.
You want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, no, I think I don't know, Matt, if you remember during this time, but I had just gotten off of a couple of surgeries that I had that had destroyed my neck a little bit, and I couldn't lift my arm up too high, so I wanted to work out, and you eventually invited me, and because of that, I started learning how to throw kicks, and I was able to work out my lower body since I wasn't able to throw punches as best as I can. So it was in a great time of need and a great time of suffering that I was introduced to Muay Thai that helped significantly. It was so impactful that even till today I still train Muay Thai, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I was about 28, 29 years old. I was totally overweight, super low self-esteem, from being the fit guy in college, a poppy in college, to chubby dude. It was a hard to come by, but Muay Thai served in that toughness, in that endurance, and it's a willingly suffering experience. That's what's funny. It's not, nobody forces you to fight, but once you're in there, you do suffer a lot. That's for sure. Which is why I would say it kind of ties in with the theme for today. Why do we suffer? Specifically in these times where it's the holidays around the corner, I've heard that depression and suicides go up during this season. It makes sense. What probably could be one of the loneliest times. I would say it's like two extremes. You could either have the most jolly family time ever for those who have that ability or opportunity rather, and then it could be the most depressing, sad experience in your life because you're all alone. What do you encounter in your practice during the season?
Yeah, I was about to say, usually we'll say, you got to plan for the summertime, because as soon as the sun comes out, everyone seems to have healed themselves. They're all good now. I got to go to counseling anymore. But with the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, you have different parts of the world. You'll have a decrease in natural sunlight and longer nights, and people are indoors. So you have seasonal affective disorder. And then as family get-togethers are on the rise, you have people who could be a range of reasons, like either family relationships that are not the best, or it's a painful reminder of family members who are no longer with them. So like that can trigger a lot of like recurring episodes of depression, and that comes up quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just also say, like, suffering is just part of life. It's human. It's a human experience. Probably the one thing that we all share, that we could all like bond over. It's inescapable, is the way I've heard it described. And one line that I totally love and am saddened, but I totally accept its legitimacy, is from the AA group, where they say, "Wherever I go, there I am. Wherever I go, there I am." Meaning that you can't escape yourself. You could distract yourself, you could change environments, but you can't escape yourself. And those are things that we'll also be discussing ourselves. For me, I didn't have any. Well, it's funny, right? Like, I did have a tragic moment in my life. I lost my mother when I was 13 years old, but I don't feel weak or hurt or held back by it. I guess I overcame it. The only times that I struggled with loneliness and that type of suffering was when I was working abroad for work, during the holidays is usually when I felt it. And it was probably a good thing because it helped me, encourage me to actually want to be with my family during those seasons, which now I make it a priority. I don't work anymore, regardless of the money. So yeah, my friend, before we begin asking why we suffer, I would have to ask, what does it mean to suffer? We have to like define it. You want to go ahead there, Chulo?
Defining suffering. Here we go. I'm gonna have to find it on the page. Go ahead and read the definition for me.
To experience or be subjected to something bad or unpleasant. To experience or be subjected to something bad or unpleasant. And in my research, I would say that I noticed two distinctions. Often the interior versus the exterior. Interior or exterior. It means that the conscious is aware of two environments simultaneously, the outer world and the inner state. The examples for the exterior, suffering can be due to the physical, the outside, like such as hunger due to famine, lack of shelter due to a tornado, enduring torture as a victim of violence. Right now, I know we're all aware there's a conflict in Israel and Palestine. We're not going to get into the politics of it, but there's totally thousands of victims on both sides that are just unfortunate victims to the exterior. They have nothing to do with it. Maybe they don't even have a bias, but they're being affected with it. Yeah. But what I would say, what we experience in the Western world more so, is the interior of depression, anxiety, loneliness. We don't really deal with the same things that a third world country does. It reminds me of the great quote of Mother Teresa. The greatest disease in the West today is not tuberculosis or leprosy. It is being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for. We can cure physical disease with medicine, but the only cure for loneliness, despair, and hopelessness is love. There are many in the world who are dying for a piece of bread, but there are many more dying for a little love. The poverty in the West is a different kind of poverty. It is not only a poverty of loneliness, but also of spirituality. There's a hunger for love.
Yeah, I think I think that's pretty spot on when you look at exactly what Matthew was talking about, was the depression, the loneliness that we see in our society, and a lot of the times it is caused by seasonal what do you call it?
Seasonal affective disorder. Yeah.
Seasonal affective disorder. I'm not sure what that is anymore because I do live in San Diego, and it's a chilly 65 degrees out right now with the sun out and not a cloud in the sky, but it really does affect you, especially where you guys are there in Ohio. But when you look around, one of the things that I noticed, especially when I was coming to my faith, was I was constantly looking for the sense of fulfillment that we're all promised whenever you go out. And I was actually being interviewed yesterday by some guy who very, very on fire, very zealous for the faith. And I was telling him about me chasing after the happiness that the world has to offer. And I was sitting at a club on Christmas Day with a bunch of friends after I had just heard of the news that one of my cousins had killed himself in a drinking and driving accident. And looking around me, I'm like, why do these people look so happy and I'm so miserable that I was chasing after? And it was at that moment when I realized that all these people were just wearing masks. It was all fake. These people were just as lonely as I was. That as I was running and chasing after what I perceived that they had, I was actually already there where they were. Because who goes to the club on Christmas instead of spending time with their family? So I think that was a huge realization for me. And that really is the effects of the West. We don't go hungry. We suffer too much of excess. So a little too much pudge on us is because we have a little too much. But yeah, I think it's very real, the kind of suffering that we see here in the West as well, in a different manner.
Yeah, but along those lines, essentially what you're talking about is like distraction from yourself right there.
Yeah.
So that's what I came across. I heard in a video where we often try to change our inner environment, address our interior by trying to change the exterior. And we have that habit of doing that. And do you want to speak on that? I think you would be more familiar with that than either of us. What are the things like you would recommend to your person who's somebody who says like I can't escape myself, I'm
Mm.
stuck in my mind.
Yeah, something you said, the interior and the exterior. We talk about internal or external locus of control in counseling psychology, and you hear this a lot from people who like to give excuses. And it's not that they think, oh, I'm going to have to give an excuse, but they rationalize suffering or lack of accountability, and they'll often say, for example, why were you late for work? Well, my alarm didn't go off. I didn't hear my alarm. It wasn't loud enough. So like implicit in that statement is it's the alarm's fault for not being loud enough for me to hear it, because I was listening for it in my sleep
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't go off. So, that alarm though, right? But no, that's the external locus of control. You've externalized your sense of control over what should have been a more thought out approach to waking up on time. So when people say things like that, like, oh, I have a problem with being late for work, and like, I try my best, but I try my best, but means they don't really try their best. And I only say that because what you say, but kind of negates what you said before. So when we go over what they do, you'll see the little gaps. So like the alarm clock example is whether it's their phone that they use and they hit snooze because it's with them in bed. It's about how badly do you want to get out of bed in the morning? Like, do you really want to wake up on time, or are you just doing the bare basics of that? Are you going to suffer momentarily when you wake up in the morning, or are you going to suffer when you have to explain to your boss why you're late? So, yeah.
What's sad about that too is that we live in such an enabling environment as well. You go out with friends, they know that you're recovering from a breakup, but immediately they give you drinks, and well, that could be like a good thing, like a bro thing for sure. But then they could also go as far as saying, "All right, dude, go mack it to that girl, like move on to the next." Or
Just like
praising.
Junior was having me do when I first met him. He was like, stop crying about the girl that broke your heart. Just get out of yourself and go hit on another girl. Remember that
No,
time?
I said go dance, bro. I said
go dance.
Yeah, dude, life is a dance. I was getting all poetic too. Come on, bro. So yeah, we live in a culture that enables it. So yeah, that's what we're caught doing. We're constantly trying to fix the interior by an exterior. We're creating excuses for ourselves. I have a friend who she has an ex, and she said that there are some people that go so far in this habit with excuses that he almost thrived on it. So anytime he heard positive music, which she liked, he would get mad and tell her to turn it off, change the music, and all the stuff that he listened to was morbid, gory. Talked about how the singer hates his life or whatever, something like that. Negative songs. So much so that it becomes a bed for you, and that's the only bed you know to sleep in. So I found that pretty interesting.
Well, I'll give a little antidote to that. After I left college, I was working as a campus minister, and it was in Chico, California. So it's kind of secluded from the rest of the cities in California. And I was there to help out the university students, but I didn't have any community for myself. And there's this one song whenever I would go to the gym by myself, there was this one song, and the things that it was saying is guns in my head and they won't go, a bullet through my head or something like that. And it was a catchy rhythm. So I was like, oh, this sounds cool. But then I think the more I kept listening to it, because I liked the rhythm of it, I started listening to the lyrics, and it started affecting me in ways that I wasn't expecting it to. It started planting a seed of a doubt or a thought in there. And before you know it, you're spiraling down this rabbit hole that it's not the healthiest for you. So
yeah, and one short little tidbit in the Power of the Mind episode, I learned that there was this coach or researcher that worked with coaches in the elite level, and of course they're willing to spend millions of dollars to do research to find the best way that their players can perform better, right? And one thing that they discovered is the verbalization of positive words, verbalizing it out loud, increase desirable results by like 10%. Sure. But they discovered that how they quantified it, I don't know. But we'll just trust them at that, right? Face value. But their undesirable results increased by 20% with the reverbalization of negative verbiage. So again, what you surround yourself with, what you listen to, it totally influences who you are in the interior, and then how you what you put out.
Yeah.
So I think what we're saying is, in those circumstances where you're just spiraling in your own thoughts, or being Debbie Downer, or always giving an excuse, you're just not captain of your ship. You're not captain of a ship, and you never deal with yourself, which is why it's important to address it. An example that I heard was, if you have an arm fidgeting, and you don't do anything about it, it won't go away. So what are you supposed to do? Go see a doctor. If your car is making weird noises, what are you going to do? You're going to go call a mechanic. But it's very common that when a person has an unhealthy mind, and by unhealthy mind means you say the crappiest things to yourself. I think I heard a quote that said, "Why is it that you allow yourself to say the shittiest things to yourself that you would never allow somebody to say to your friend?"
Yeah.
And that makes total sense. What I literally call myself, "Oh, dude, you're an idiot." I catch myself. I literally call myself an idiot when I make a mistake, or sometimes just randomly, because I don't think things are going well for me. What are your thoughts on that, guys?
Mm-hmm. Interior dialogue is extremely important. A lot of the time, sometimes when I'm talking to a client and they're telling me their story, and one of the things with different kinds of clients, you have different ways that they'll tell their story, and you'll have the more educated tend to be able to rationalize and intellectualize their problems a lot easier. So they know all this stuff. They know why what they do is bad, and how they shouldn't do that, and they'll describe things to me, but they won't get into feelings. And once we get into the feeling part, so okay, you understand how your thought process is negative, but let's talk about how what you say makes you feel about yourself. So when they're self-rating, when they kind of downplay something, you listen and you can hear a pattern of dismissiveness about any kind of accomplishment. So I start a lot of my sessions with, what good things have happened for you this week? What can you pat yourself on the back for? What accomplishments have you made? And at first, a lot of people have no idea what to say. They're like, I don't know. And then, but once you plant that seed, and I encourage them, when you come back, your homework is to tell me good things that you've done that you deserve credit for. So they do this, and at first it's simple stuff. I woke up on time, made it to work on time, and then we start to uncover more. So there's this deficit. People who come into counseling have a deficit of good things to say of themselves. They have good things to say about other people, but that self-talk, you'll hear a lot of that with people who don't really have much positive things to say, and at the heart of it is sometimes core beliefs that I'm not good enough, or I need to be better, or because I'm not this person who I want to be, then I'm just not good enough now, and until I'm that person. But they're talking about an ideal that could be crafted from different people they know, like role models, and they'll never be somebody else. They can only be themselves, and they can't be somebody in the future. You can only be yourself right now. So if you don't talk about the good things that you're doing, then you're really setting yourself up for it's kind of like that person who's listening to negative music all the time. Negative self-talk, whether it's unconscious or not, will bring down your efficacy for improvement. So that coach and the players, if you're not, those pep talks to get people pumped to go out and do stuff, they're ready to go. But when do we do that for ourselves? It's Monday morning, I'm feeling great for work, I'm going to do a good job at my job, be great with my clients, people are going to love me. We don't do that. We wake up and we're like, oh, I'm tired, today's going to suck. And then you get to work and you're like, oh, I can't wait for break. So worth thinking about, right?
Mm-hmm. You reminded me of so this could be a suggestion for anybody who actually wants to improve their self-talk and their mental demeanor. My business consultant that my brother and I were getting counsel from, she's every time before a meeting, she said we needed to start with a couple things we were going to celebrate about ourselves. And dude, I took that to heart, because first she told me to just make a long list, and I made that long list, and each time I shared a couple things from that list, and it really like motivates you, and it really makes you proud of yourself. And that's one thing that she helped me do was accept was it's okay to be proud of yourself. It really is, but it actually requires you first to sit down and write it. Nothing happens if you don't write it or verbalize it. So that's one thing that we could suggest. By all means, write things down, celebrate yourself, celebrate what is good in your life right now. So, guys, this isn't an episode so much to suggest behavior changes. We've discussed that already several times in our prior shows. Nothing usually changes until you change your behaviors. We're here more so having this episode to, one, identify what suffering is, perhaps recognize some of the benefits that suffering may give us, and then suggest a couple ideological paradigms that exist in this world, and then see what fits for you. We've always heard of that underdog story where the guy who was able to overcome all odds and pull through, and because of that, we love and respect him. So suffering is not meritless. Suffering has a purpose. It could be used for good. It could build somebody. And so there were a couple of things that I wrote down. Chulo, you want to take over?
To face those parts of ourselves we might otherwise ignore. These experiences allow us to discover new interests, correct past mistakes, and develop resilience. Builds character.
Yeah, dude. The point is you turn inward. You finally turn inward and address issues.
Yeah. All right.
You
don't want to move on.
You were kind of saying that people escape themselves. People don't want to address themselves, pretty much.
Yeah, and we kind of see it reflected in the culture today. We see a turning away from frustration, from things that we consider offensive, perhaps, or hurtful, or not radically accepting of everything we want to be on a subjective level. So as opposed to building resilience, we force other people to be less expressive of like deeply held opinions that might be contrary. So like any idea of values, if you have values, if you have one value, that means the counterpoint of that value is something that is not good. So like the idea of objective truth, for example. So to espouse your objective truth might call into question someone else's conception of let's say pleasure. If you're valuing discipline, someone else who is not as disciplined might say, well, you can go to the gym, but you know what? By doing that, you're participating in body shaming people who just can't make it to the gym. So you probably shouldn't do that. So instead of developing resilience for suffering, going to the gym, you're actually feeding into the sense of fragility.
True. Another thing that suffering that we all know happens is just that it helps us empathize with other people. Helps us to empathize, and then that bond that could happen especially when you suffer together. The easy example is like the Navy SEALs. When I was in there for a couple of years and I was doing my tours, there was this bond, that Latin phrase of "Irtu Fritates," brotherhood forever, or something like that. No, I'm joking. Totally joking, guys.
That's called stolen valor is what he's talking about now.
Hey, man, one of my most embarrassing stories was in DC, and I had just bought this cap from a thrift store. It looked like a cool military hat. It was just ignorance, man. And I was in this historic. I was at the Abraham Lincoln Memorial Building, the statue of him was sitting down. Ooh. In the gift shop. There was this young military age male, Asian, fit, prim and proper, and pushing the wheelchair of a veteran. He sees me and immediately does a double take, sees me and immediately turns to me and goes like this and salutes me with honor. But then he realizes what happens, because I had no idea how to react. And he realizes that it's like old school war tags on it. And he got so livid. I've never been killed by eyes, but maybe that's one time I got killed by eyes. But the whole calling out stolen valor wasn't a big thing yet. We're talking like 20 years ago, maybe when I was like 17 or 18. So I am so embarrassed still by that, dude. Mm. But anyways, I mean, we've seen all those Navy SEAL stories. I mean, I'm envious of that bond. I wish I had it.
But think about it this way. What we created there at the university with Muay Thai was that bond, that allowing each other to suffer with each other. I still have videos of you and I sparring and of getting kicked and punched in the face and allowing us to suffer with each other so much that
Dude, my kicks to
that
your face were acts of love so that
yeah,
you could get.
exactly.
Where's the pajamas? Oh, okay. Sorry,
This
guys.
episode brought to you by Hitchhiker. No, I'm just kidding.
Not officially sponsored, though. If they do want to donate beer, they're more than welcome to.
Oh,
Sorry for that interruption. We had a few technical difficulties, but back to what we were saying. As me kicking Papi in the face was a form of love for each other, and but that one guy who was your former roommate, trying to knock me out along with everybody else who was new, was not showing love and a form of bonding and friendliness. That's for sure. So,
he was administering suffering as a sadist.
a sadist. There you go. But no, but in all reality, it was Papi, you were saying that the Navy SEALs have something that you envy, that they have that bond, but we're able to create those things, and I think especially in the Western world, since we don't have a lot of that physical pain and suffering, we have to go out and seek it, or else you become stagnant and sit in your comfort. That's why I think America has an explosion of gyms. When I was, getting married about five or so months ago, one of my wife's friends came to visit from France. He came in for the wedding, and it's so funny though, because I added him as a friend on online, and he says, "Look at me, I'm such an American." And he always would post pictures on Instagram of him at the gym in the morning. Apparently, it's an American phenomenon to constantly go to the gym to seek out to be healthy, because other countries you're walking around a lot, not as many preservatives in your food, but we as Americans have to seek out suffering in physical ways that other people do in other places don't have to do. So,
Yeah. Now, just to clarify, at least to the female audience, because I'm sure it's very odd for them to hear you want things that cause you to suffer. So let's clarify that. I would more so say we want challenging things where we can hopefully live up to the challenge. I would say the first two things that pop into my mind when I think of Navy SEALs, why we all get so worked up and just wish we could have had that opportunity, was that one, it's hard. It is hard. There's such a thing as Hell Week, where it's the worst thing that you will ever experience, and only the strong survive kind of deal.
Mm.
Make it. I think that's more of a Marine thing. Sorry, guys. But then you all know about that fraternity that develops, that bond. And that's what we crave as well. We want to live up to the challenge, and we crave community, the bond.
Yeah, consensual violence, consensual suffering. There's something to be said for being able to, so for example, even if you're not going to the gym, other examples of suffering that most people can relate to are like school. When I was in my undergrad, notoriously challenging school in Toronto, U of T, University of Toronto, and I would not have made it had I not had a group of people that I was studying with for each class. So we put that work in the library. We'd sit there, we'd quiz each other. No one liked it. It was suffering. We pulled all-nighters. They had the library open 24/7 during finals. And I remember we had suffered tremendously in a first world way, right? But not a lot of sleep. We'd take naps and shifts, wake up, and then some of us would go do an exam, come right back to the library and study for the next exam, do that, come right back again. And then, that was big suffering. So after that, we were able to just, we could reminisce then. It was like recounting, not necessarily war stories per se, but, you get my drift. It wasn't a fun time, but we saw each other, and we saw how our character was built, simultaneously. Like just seeing one of my friends go off to do an exam, and they could go home, they could sleep, they could go to the pub. They came right back, and they're like, "What's next? We got to study for that next one." They were ready. So you could see that character that was everyone was building at the time.
There's one of my favorite shows that I love watching, and I can watch over and over again. It's called Band of Brothers. It's an HBO series about the 101st Airborne, and there's a specific episode in there. It's I believe it's the Battle of Bastogne, I believe it's what it's called, and it's one of the
Bastille.
coldest Bastille. There you go. Yeah, the Battle of Bastille. It was one of the coldest, harshest winters, low on ammunition, low on supplies, and it's really interesting though because the next episode when they're out of there and it's warm now, and there's a guy who was injured and he had to come back, but he didn't experience that battle, and he's like, "Hey, man, I heard Bastille was really rough." And they look at him like, as though he's a stranger. He had been with them before when they first jumped in Normandy, but he missed that battle, that suffering, that chaos, the death that occurred. And when he came back, they treated him like a stranger because, like, it's like, "Well, you were in the hospital." He's like, "Well, yeah, I was in the hospital. Like, I couldn't." Say, "Well, yeah, but this guy and this guy went to the hospital and came back. Why didn't you leave?" It's like this guy was hurt and he still came back, but you sat around and did nothing, and you skipped out on the suffering that we all endured together. And he felt like an outcast. It wasn't until the next battle where he had to prove himself was he finally accepted back as the group into the group. It's something about suffering, about going through our hardship that brings everyone together. It's a beautiful thing, and I think it's one of the reasons why I love watching that over and over again.
On a first world level, like, so my instructors, I go to Muay Thai, right? And someone walks in late, right after conditioning. So convenient. And they're joining, they're like, "Hey guys," instructor will stop the class and he'll be like, "Hey, you just got in now?" And they're like, "Yeah." They're like, "Okay, good. 100 burpees, 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups. Join us when you're done."
Yeah.
And then we all look at him like, "Yeah, you thought you did something, huh?" And then they could come back and they got the respect. They're like, "Oh, you did? Okay, yeah, come join us."
Yeah.
Dude, and that's another thing too that I hope we can clarify for women. We're tribal. We're
Yeah.
still primitive men, masculine males. And not until like I remember in the gym here that we used to go to, the pros wouldn't talk to me in the beginning. I try to be nice and all that. I try to spar with them, but then they go once with me, but then they would see that I'm not up to par, so they didn't want to spar again. And it wasn't until like I got better and proved myself that I was technically good enough and I could take a hit, and then they like accepted me back into the clan, kind of, and it was exhilarating. It was
Yeah.
exhilarating to be a part of the clan.
Big compliment was, "He's good work."
Oh, dude.
Mm,
Oh, dude. Yeah, you live for that.
that's awesome.
Oh man. So talking about all this, I'm sure we all agree, man. Like suffering somehow it forges you, and those people who have suffered the most. I'm sure we all have that one or two person. I would say for me, it's my father. The people who have suffered the most are the people who tend to like appreciate life the most, tend to be the most real, the most raw. Um, tend to also not be materialistic, tend to not be superficial, tend to value things more. Who would it be for you guys that you guys personally know?
Hmm.
For the most.
Yeah, like for me, I would say it was my dad because he grew up in the pueblo, deep in the mountains of the Andes. Hardships. His biological father, abandoned him. He worked day and night, Monday to Saturday, in the fields. Went to Lima, worked in a factory, worked his butt off. Came to America. He worked 6 days a week, and if they offered him a seventh day at McDonald's or as a janitor, he was describing this to us, my brothers and I. He would be like, "Oh yeah, all right, let's go." Like for him, it was like a lucky thing that he got an extra shift on the seventh day, and all that money he would send to Peru to feed us. Not a hardships. How about you
Yeah.
guys?
I would say similar with my father. He came over to the U.S. As an illegal immigrant. He hopped over the border and he worked here for many years. He eventually went back, married my mom, came back, and eventually brought her over. I remember as a child, winter time. He's worked in a poultry farm all of his life. So for I remember him coming home and he always smelled like egg. So like the smell of like raw egg, to me that reminds me of my father coming home and this loving, caring man that comes home after so many hours of working. And I remember as a kid during Christmas time, because apparently that's one of the busiest times of the season for egg production. he would work about, I want to say, between 15 to 18-hour shifts. So during winter time, I barely saw him. And I remember waking up in the morning, he was gone, and me going to bed, and he still hadn't arrived. So he would come home for a few hours, sleep maybe 5, and then get back up and go to work. And this happened for about a month straight, and eventually it would dwindle down a little bit. But the idea of my dad saying, this is what needs to be done. And as one of my mentors says, this is what we do. This is what we do because it needs to be done. And I think my dad is a perfect example of that as well, of sacrifice for the responsibilities over his shoulder. Responsibility is a huge thing in order for you to step up as a man. Yeah.
But dude, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yes. Well, my dad too. We came from just before we moved to North America, very lucrative job in the Middle East, but the bank he was working for wanted some shady deals to be done, look the other way kind of thing. And he was like, no, I'm not going to do that. So he resigned, started working factory nights. He was very accomplished financial advisor, very big in the banks, really good skill set that could have taken a lot of companies far, but he worked from the ground up again. But, with that too, I have an uncle of mine who is currently in prison, but the reason I bring him up is because there's long suffering there where we don't know how long he'll be, but he suffers regularly, and it's like, like ascetics, the brothers in the monastery, they sequester themselves from the outside world and they pray. That's their sacrifice for us. And in a very same way, all he does now is read scripture and just intercedes for everybody. So big suffering, not a lot going for him, but there are some days, when he talks to the family, he's suffering, but there are others where he's very much edified by being able to do that. So there's a lot of examples, of turning that suffering into something meaningful.
Yeah, that's what we're going to get into. Okay, we're discussing what is suffering, the benefits that we have experienced and other people have experienced from suffering, and then what's the purpose of suffering. We'll get to that. What are you going to say, Chulo?
Yeah, can I just point one thing out about the three of us here? So I would say the three of us are highly motivated individuals who understand that suffering can be used as something good. And one thing that I just noticed is that three of us have strong male role models in our lives, especially our father, somebody who was there from the very beginning, who have shown us what it means to sacrifice and do the hard thing. I think that's super important as for future generations to be that male example for others.
And again, some insight for women. I don't know why I keep on saying this, but because I'm sure we're confusing to them. And so, I haven't asked sometimes, okay, tell me the inside details about men. This could be one of them. We don't necessarily need to have this elaborate reason as to why we do what we do. Sometimes it's just sufficient to say it's because it needs to be done. Or one thing, I used to kind of burn two lights at whatever, the candle at both ends, volunteering while I worked and did my master's in nursing and all that. But I still volunteered. And one of my friend nurses asked me, why are you doing this? And I can proudly say that my response was, if I don't do it, no one else is going to be in the life of these kids. And that was true. No one else would have cared. So I'm happy that's like, we have that background with our fathers, with all our dads.
Yeah.
One last thing to mention. The saints are great students to the school of suffering. I'm sure we're all in agreement with that. The saints are great students in the school of suffering. And I'm sorry if this is a saint or not, Leon Bois. I don't know if he's a saint or not, but I didn't write that detail. But he said something that will blow your mind away. There are places in the heart which do not yet exist. There are places in the heart which do not yet exist. But into those places comes suffering so that they might have existence. But into those places comes suffering so that they might have existence. And I find that so beautiful. It is so true. Parts within my heart opened up when my mother passed away. Parts within my heart have opened up since my last relationship, which was difficult, and other things. Like, I find myself less judgy with people who have relationship issues or people who drink too much alcohol. I find myself less judgy because I've struggled with it myself. And I have compassion more so for others. How do you guys react to this?
I got a quote. So Khalil Gibran, one of my favorite poets, he says, I recommend this for everyone. There's a book called The Prophet. It's just a compilation of poems based on a prophet, and he's about to board a ship and sail elsewhere. And he has different subjects that he speaks of, and the people, he's leaving this city or village, and they all ask him questions. Speak to us of this. And this one is Joy and Sorrow.
Say it in the title.
Khalil Gibran, The Prophet. Khalil, Khalil, Gibran, Gibran.
The title.
And The Prophet. So
title. Oh, is this
yeah. So this is the excerpt on Joy and Sorrow.
Oh, okay. On Joy and Sorrow. So
what you said sparked this certain excerpt. He was saying this. So this woman asks, "Speak to us of joy and sorrow," and he says, I'll skip a little bit down. The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? And is it not the lute that soothes your spirit, but it's and is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed with knives? So joy and sorrow, he says, are inseparable. Together they come, and when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed. So basically he's saying, right, if you don't have that experience of sorrow, of loss, it will not carve deep enough into you to hold that reservoir of joy that you could also have. So there's that separation, but also the relationship between the two.
Wow.
Here's to that, man. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
The analogy that I heard, which people could be more familiar with, because we've all heard we only use 20% of our brains. Imagine it like only using 20% of your heart, and suffering awakens that potential to be able to use more of it. You could love more, be more understanding, have more compassion when you endure hardships.
Mm.
So that's another analogy for the people who may benefit from that. And now, my friends, the part as to why I wanted to invite you, because sometimes I listen to you and we're hanging out, and I'm just, my head's on my arm and I'm twirling my hair, and you're just telling me all these sweet nothings of counseling stories, and how you implement that into your own life as well. And I don't think we were talking about suffering specifically, but you were sharing your stories of your therapy methods, and you mentioned stoicism.
Mm-hmm.
Let's kill first what people think stoicism is. Could you do that? Like, I think you might do it better, because people tend to have a stereotype of what stoicism is, right?
Yeah.
Stoicism, like, you could just, they're just dry, no emotion. They don't, they try to disassociate themselves from life completely and are not realistic. I guess I just said it right there. So that's what I thought is the stereotype for stoicism. But then you told me more, and I was blown away, especially how it could apply for secular cases where people are not religious or not wanting to hear anything religious, or they're so familiar with the typical counseling process that they just that they immediately turn off and form a wall. But then you say this, and then bang, oh, you need the password?
Yeah. So you think, for stoicism, a lot of people will say something very similar. They might say like, oh, you're a stoic, something terrible happened and you didn't even bat an eye. You're such a stoic. But part of that is true, right? There's an ability to endure suffering that is associated with stoicism. And I think the importance with that is it's so much more than simply not caring or not, or like having a stalwart defense against suffering and being like, I'm okay. Because that's a little bit of denial, right? Because sometimes it affects us. But a lot of it comes from what is the mindset that we take? How do we conceptualize what we've been talking about this whole time? How do we conceptualize suffering? And how will that conceptualization of that lead to a virtuous life? So that's part of what's behind it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the three things that I wanted to mention was Stoicism, then the Eastern philosophical approach of the Buddhists. That's always usually an easy one. And then what do Catholics say about suffering? You're familiar, Chulo. We'll talk more about Stoicism in a bit once you get settled. Chulo, you're familiar more so with the Eastern philosophies. What is your experience with how they would answer that question of like, why do we suffer?
Well, I think a lot of, especially Buddhism, it's the, total nirvana is the eventual goal of Buddhism, and I think that suffering, according to them, is the attachment to this world. So when you enter total nirvana, you have to totally detach yourselves from all of it. So in the end, because we want to detach ourselves from all of this, suffering eventually does not matter. Nothing of this world eventually matters. I'm not.
They say to desire is to suffer.
Exactly. Yeah. So because desire is something of the physical world, it's something of this material world that's before us. So you should not want, I guess is the general idea.
But in a better light, it doesn't need to sound too, I don't want to say it's not morbid. It just almost sounds too strict what you guys are saying. But in an effort to not be attached to the materialistic, superficial things of this world, sometimes we're suffering because of immature or unnecessary desires. So instead of suffering for no good reason, the most mature, the most hopeful, the most, from their perspective, realistic way to not suffer. They could even be doing this out of desire of love for you. You should not suffer, and you do that by like ridding yourself of desire. That's the way at least I received it when I was doing some research on this. It's almost like an act of love. Like I want you to not suffer. That I would say is beautiful unto itself.
So where Buddhism says, I shall not want, Christianity says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And then what does he do? He leads you to verdant pastures. So there's this missing thing of, sure, if you don't want anything, then like you're not really suffering because you don't want anything. But that's at the end of that is nihilism, right? There's just no end to that, because to live is to suffer, and to desire is to suffer. Or sorry, to live is to desire, and to desire is to suffer. So if you don't desire anything, you can't suffer. Therefore, you surrender all forms of desire or want. But
yeah. Go ahead. No, I just wanted to add go ahead. I'll let you finish.
No, please. Add it.
To me, it's along with that. Papi, you said something about it's also a form of love, but the problem with love is the desire for something for another. So therefore, that would immediately negate
So I negated myself
love
by saying that if I were a true Buddhist. Wow, man can't do nothing these days.
But I think eventually we all lead to the desire to detach yourself. So even the desire to detach yourself is still a desire unto itself, I would say. So I don't know. It's an interesting concept. So we're coming at this from a Judeo-Christian background, from a Catholic understanding. So for us, the whole thing of detaching yourself completely from everything seems almost surreal, because for us is reaching towards the ultimate desire. It's not detachment of desire, but it's fulfilling the true desire of the heart, which is the reaching for that which is the greatest, which is God. So.
Can you tell us more about some of the scenarios where you would apply Stoicism in your work life?
Yeah. So I told this story to some of my clients. One of my roommates has his favorite mug of his, former roommate, and he's like, to me, he was an enigma because he loved to wake up early. And at the time, I was a night owl. He'd be up early in the morning and he loved to make coffee. And despite my love of sleep, when I smell coffee, I also wake up. So he's making coffee early in the morning. And then the big bonus with this dude was I'm going to tie this all back. Don't worry. He would roast his own beans on the stove. It was magical. And then he has a Chemex. It's just a really fancy way to have fancy way to have coffee to pour over. So he would have this full Chemex, fresh coffee, freshly roasted, best coffee you could have. I didn't have to do a thing. I'd come down and he'd be like, "You got to help me with that because I can't drink this whole Chemex by myself. It's too much." So I'd come down and pour myself a mug, and he'd have the same mug every time. And I asked him about it one time. I was like, "That's a cool mug. Like, what's up with that mug?" And he's like, "Well, my dad got it for me once, and every time I sip from this mug, I think of my pops because it's a gift that he gave me that was very thoughtful, and it had all this like quotes from I guess the Middle Ages of what they thought of coffee as an evil thing, terrible for man." And it was kind of funny because it's ironic. It's a coffee mug. So one day, I wake up to the smell of coffee, and I'm thinking, "Oh, it's early," and then I hear a smash. Something breaks. And I'm like, "Oh, what happened?" And then I just hear a, "Dang it!" Like this exclamation of dismay. So I go downstairs and there is a puddle of coffee and a shattered mug. And he is just looking at it. And it's the mug. It is the mug, his beloved mug, the only mug he ever uses in the mornings. And I'm like, "Oh man, I'm sorry. Like, I know that mug meant a lot to you." And he's like, "I can't believe it. I should have been more careful." Da da da. We clean it up. He has us another cup of coffee, and we go to work. And then days later, I'm coming down in the morning again, and he's like, I'm asking him, "How you doing?" He's like, "I don't know, man. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, today I made my coffee, and I just felt so terrible that I lost this mug. It was stupid. I knocked it off the counter by accident. I should have done better. Like, should have like been more careful." And then he's like, "I know it's just a stupid mug, but like, man." And I'm like, "We as sentimental value, right? We know sentimental value." And that stuck in my mind. And at that moment, I didn't really tie it into anything big. But when you look at that occurrence and his attachment to it, there's something that came to my mind as I began to look at Stoicism more closely. And it's as we like looked at it, he realized his attachment to the mug was, I don't want to say arbitrary, but it's the mug itself is just like this glass, Franciscan University. So this has some memories attached. If you've been to the university, right? If I were to shatter this on the ground, he'd be upset. But it's a cup to hold. Yeah, it's basically a cup to hold liquid, right? That's what its utility is. Beyond that, it also holds memory. But like, you could solve that problem by cleaning it and giving me a new vessel to hold my liquid. So like, what's the big deal? It's the emotional attachment. So I'm saying all of this because if I have any object, any external thing in my life, one day he's not going to own this anymore. One day it's going to break, or he's going to move, he's going to leave it behind. He might give it away to somebody. But the turmoil you experience when you lose something of emotional value, of sentimental value, is partially because you have not bought this and conceptualized, "I'm not going to own this." At some point, we buy something and we think it's mine. This is mine. I own it. This is my thing. It's mine. But you don't think of the point of separation, and naturally so, right? Like, it's an object that you plan to have for the foreseeable future, for long down the line. But you don't think to buy something and like it's not a disposable thing. It's a reusable thing. But part of this nature, it's glass. It's breakable. It's going to. We're not going to have it at some point. So many things in our lives. When I tell that story of the mug, had my roommate considered this gift that his father gave him was only made meaningful by the fact that his father gave it to him. So that's an act of kindness by his father. we can attach ourselves to acts of kindness from other people. So instead of this mug represents my father's generosity, that is true. But you think of your father and you think of your father as generous, let's say. My father is a generous person. Here's one of the many instances of generosity. And this is very, like, it's small compared to all that he's done. So if I accept that I'm not going to have this at some point, not that I don't care about it, I value it for what it does, but I don't have the emotional attachment that I might. I might recall a fond memory of it being given to me by somebody else. But with him, he resolved that issue by telling his father what happened, and his dad's like, if I find it, I'll give you another one, but it is what it is. You're going to lose things eventually. He gave a very stoic response, not knowing it's stoicism, perhaps, right? So what more can be said for our consumer culture where, like, things that we own form attachments because of the things that they represent to us, but we don't ever think this is an immutable object that I'm not going to have soon at some point in my life. If we were to do that, then being detached from it is much easier. So that's like I don't tell it as long and drawn out in counseling. I give that excerpt and I apply it to their example of what they've lost or whatever. It's difficult because if they're talking about losing somebody, like, a mug is not a person. But in the same way, we fail to grasp sometimes our parents are going to die one day. And this is memento mori, another stoic point, right? One of our friends, we may speak to them for the last time for the rest of our lives and we'll never know. But if you don't think of that, then you're not really prepared for the separation.
Yeah, and that's when you and I had that type of conversation. We were talking about losing someone we loved. And this is why I love being a student to life, because our conversation just led to that, and I was enamored by it. And I was, it really hit my heart, and I kept it. And I think I shared with you that it was in Qatar, in the Middle East, where I went with my father for the World Cup. I shared this story with him, and it really, like, impacted him, because he realized, wow, yeah, we do live our lives like we have ownership over something or somebody, but we really don't. If we're being intellectually honest, we're just transitory in this life. Nobody is our own. So yeah, so that type of acknowledgement, I would say, could be very healthy for us as individuals. It could help us cope with certain things, confront certain life disasters, I would say. Yeah. Yep. And now, of course, we lead to what maybe we're most familiar with, or I would think we're most familiar with, is the Catholic approach towards suffering. And I give it up to you guys. What do you think? What is the Catholic answer towards suffering?
Embrace. I would say embrace the suffering, because as the scriptures say, Jesus says, pick up your cross daily, and that cross is a suffering. And the thing is, if your very own God has suffered,
as Catholics, why do we suffer? What is God a sadist? Is he a bad dude? Why do we suffer?
He's
a good God. If he's a good God, why does a good God let bad things happen?
And I would say that if we were to really understand the answer to the question, and let me answer the question, and I would say if we would truly understand what the meaning of suffering, we would have the answer to all of the questions in life. It's one of the great mysteries that we will never comprehend. We can come to a sort of comfort of us suffering along with God, but it's one of the questions why I don't think we can ever truly answer. We can get into it, why we believe, why we think we're allowed to suffer, but we ultimately don't know, I would say.
What is second letter of Paul to the Corinthians? He mentions a thorn in his flesh, right? So he says, it's like a messenger of Satan meant to torment me. What's this thorn in my side? And he pleads with God to remove it. And the answer he gets is, nah. God says, my grace is sufficient for you.
Mm.
Basically says, my power is made perfect in weakness. And what weakens us? Suffering weakens us. So there's a reason for suffering. And I'll tell you a careful anecdote from counseling. I go to the prison, or sorry, not the prison, the jail, the local jail on Fridays to do assessments. And a lot of the men there, I've never seen more men cry than in jail. Almost every single time I've spoken to somebody there, whether or not they signed up for the assessment, they're shedding some tears because they're at rock bottom and they are suffering. And the disconnect is, there's a lot of questions. Why is this happening to me? Why am I suffering? And sometimes it's, I wanted to do such good in the world, and why is it now that the only time that I actually have to do good is here? Why does it have to be here in jail? Why can't I do good outside of it? And this is what Paul says. Why is there a thorn in my side, something that constantly brings me down? And the answer is the same. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. So sometimes I'll answer that question from the inmates, and I'll explain, it's not now. When would you have the opportunity to ask this question, except for when you are suffering the most? So when you're outside, you're suffering, and you have ready opportunities that you know of, where you're not asking God to help you, but you're like, I'll handle this. So it's, I'll handle this. Here's some cash. What you got for me? Oh, no, you got a little bit of meth. You got a little bit of this. And you take your drug and you're feeling fine. You're not suffering anymore because you're not here. So there's the grace that was offered that's not freely taken. There's the thorn in your side that you have to get over. And there's opportunity for growth. But you don't recognize it until you're weak and at rock bottom and you're suffering.
Which goes back to that quote of that guy who says, there's certain parts of your heart that you don't even know exist yet. And not until you suffer do you discover it. Wow, cool. It's a good story. But just on the technical level, I think as Catholics, correct me if I'm wrong, we suffer because of sin, original sin, right? That opened the door to all that, right? That's like a technical answer. And then why can't just God get rid of it? It makes me think of the game Injustice. I'm a DC fan, sure. I'm a Marvel DC
Love
fan.
that game. Great game.
Never played it, but in I think I have a freaking squirrel like squirming around right above me. We'll figure it out after this show. I keep on hearing this noise. But anyway, in the DC game of Injustice, Superman turns evil, totalitarian, dictatorial, and that's because he unknowingly kills Lois Lane, his wife, who was pregnant at the time. The Joker like tricked him, like made him hallucinate.
And his child?
Yeah, so yeah, I know, right? And that's like true Joker tactics. Who doesn't care if he even dies? He just wants to create mayhem in the world.
Yeah,
suffering. Yeah,
non-consensual.
Non-consensual.
And how does Superman react? And he just develops this reasoning of there's suffering in this world because of evil. No evil will mean no suffering. How do we get rid of evil? I need to create complete order. So he essentially becomes a world dictator with a strong judging hand. And but of course, people don't respect him or love him or follow him out of respect or love. They do it out of just fear. So the same thing with God. God won't make us robots. He won't make us always do the right things. He still offers us free will, because it's only with free will existing that we will actually be able to choose whether we actually love him or not. So is that what, do you guys agree with that as to why we suffer from the Catholic perspective?
Sin, yes.
Well, yeah.
I think you summed it up pretty well there. I will also include that the game Injustice was also created into an animated movie on HBO Max. If you want to watch it, it's actually really good. They take some liberties in its differences, but it's a really good film if you want to watch it.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then to our last category, which I would even say it's probably like the really motivating side of it. It's like, okay, the purpose of suffering. If suffering has no purpose, I think that's what would lead to suicide. I think that's what would lead to depression, despair. But if you have purposeful suffering, now what does that mean under the Catholic interpretation?
Purposeful suffering is what you said?
Yeah. Easy question. A person who's not familiar with Catholic theology, we who like embrace suffering and say that suffering helps us experience the cross and we walk with Christ and it's what helps us get to heaven. It's almost like we're praising a torture device. You know, how the heck could we possibly say it is through the cross that we get through heaven? I remember this Jewish lady that we used to work next to me in the mall of Paramus Park in New Jersey. And I happened to mention I was Christian, and she immediately goes, "Why do you praise a torture device?" And I was like, "What the heck does she mean?" And I never thought about it. I was like, "Oh, well, I guess so. It is a torture device, the cross, but that's not what we're praising. We're not praising the cross." And if I wanted to be bratty or quick witted, I would have said, "Well, why did you put him there?" Kind of deal. But I didn't. I wasn't quick enough like that yet. So, anywho, tell me, you guys, what's the purpose of suffering? Is it just
Well,
in vain?
Well, no, eventually it's to unify ourselves to Christ. I mean, if God himself comes down to this earth and embraces suffering, and we are called to be just like him and walk the ways in the footsteps of Christ, then we are also called to walk with him. And I think, you know, in moments of suffering in my life, one of the things that I always imagine, and whenever I'm in prayer, is to sit with Jesus in the Garden of Olives, Garden of Gethsemane, of him realizing the suffering that's coming, and as he's sweating blood, and how alone he felt. I always imagine myself sitting there with him, suffering along with him. He's not alone, but we're walking this journey together. And I think another perfect example of that is as he is walking, carrying his cross. There's a man who's pulled from the crowd to help him, and walks with him and embraces the suffering with him. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing, you know. If God himself can come down and suffer, then we should embrace our sufferings and walk along with him. That's why we, as this Jewish lady said, embrace a torture device, because just as if you've ever watched the movie The Passion of the Christ, I think one of the most beautiful, subtle moments is when Jesus, when they give him the cross, he goes and he hugs it. He just embraces the cross. And one of the thieves says, "Look at him. He's embracing this thing that's gonna be the cause of his death." And that should be the Christian approach. Just like Matthew said, the Christian, the Cistercians used to say in the halls as they would remember their silence, and they would only say a couple of words to their brothers. They would say, "Frater memento mori," brother, remember your death. And because death eventually comes for all of us, and death includes suffering, and we should walk in that way. Yeah.
One of the things that pops up from, not even necessarily, though it does point to Christian values. One of the universals that I find with any client who comes into my counseling office is when I ask them, and this is specifically for mothers and fathers, right? How do you do what you do? What helps you to get through what you're going through, whatever the suffering they're experiencing? And I usually ask this when I'm evaluating for like suicidality, right? Are you going to off yourself? Are you going to kill yourself? Do you have thoughts of self-harm? And if they say no, but what they've told me is pretty terrible to experience, and I could understand why you'd want to end your life, they'll say, "No, of course not. I would never do that." And I'd say, well, what keeps you going? And a lot of it is self-sacrificial love. I have kids. My children, like, they deserve my presence. They deserve for me to be around my family. My mother's not doing too well. My father's not doing right. So there's this sacrifice for somebody else that is Christ-like in nature. And a lot of the time, a lot of my clients, I work with Medicaid clients, so they don't have a lot of cash, right? You have to fall below an income threshold to get access to Medicaid in the States. So you're here and you're not making X amount of cash, but your counseling is free, paid by Medicaid. So a lot of the time they're not in the best of positions, but they'll tell me all of these things they have to do, and a lot of it comes at the expense of their health. So they are literally dying for their family because I'm working on very practical solutions to help them sleep well, eat well, that kind of stuff that's manageable. But also the mental turmoil of being stressed out, etc. But sometimes it's just to the point where they can't help their family unless their health is at risk, which is a terrible thing, right? To realize for people, but to them it's worth it. There's this self-sacrificial love where the suffering is worth it. They don't care. They willingly sacrifice sleep. They willingly give their kid their food. They willingly work overtime hours under the table. All sorts of stuff. They've done unspeakable things, let's say, for their kids, for their family, for whoever else, as best they understand to do. And there's what makes it all worth it in the end. And like, I hear terrible stories and I ask that question. And when I hear a resounding, I'd never hurt myself or do that, the reason is always for somebody else. It's not because I love my life. Like, objectively speaking, they're like, I'm depressed. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Your life is not the best. Your life sucks. I don't say that, right? But their life is terrible. But they keep going at a detriment to their health for other people. And then, of course, the work that we do is like, how do we make what you're doing sustainable? What resources can we give you? So my hope is a lot of my clients, though, do have belief in a higher power. And there's something to be said. If you look at Pew Research statistics will show in times of plenty, belief in God declines. In times of turmoil and want, belief in God shoots up again. So look at it now. I think we'll see belief has declined, but we've also had a lot of weird things to argue about in the absence of actual want, first world problems, so to speak, that have created some kind of friction. But like for the people who are below that income threshold, they seem to be closer to God than most of my clients who come in and they're doing fairly well. You know, maybe they're not reporting all their income, for example, to get Medicaid, but they're like, free counseling, let's do that. And they're doing okay. They're educated and like, they don't have that same level of accepting self-sacrifice on a radical level as my other clients do. And sometimes even without God, like they don't believe in God, but like they're like, I'll do it for my family, and that's what makes sense. And I'm like, wow, like that's spiritual. You may not know that, but that's spiritual.
Dude, and that's why I really wanted to invite you to get those type of insights that we would have normally not heard. Thank you for sharing that, man. Thank you. Let's talk about the difference, because we do have some Protestant Christians that will view this. And I even got some feedback from one of my buddies. And there is a difference on how they justify suffering, explain suffering, but without getting into the theology of it. All right, let me backtrack. We've already established that suffering, carving out that hole so that joy may go in. Okay, so there's like a beautiful side to suffering in life. It also could form your character. It could make you rock solid, somebody who could tackle life even better in the future. It could help you become an empathizer, a very understanding, compassionate person for others. We've already identified all these good things, open stuff in your heart that you had no idea was there. You're only using 20% of your heart. So from suffering, we've established that good things can come from it. If you choose it, if you decide to react that way. Okay. I would say that though Protestants acknowledge that, yes, there is suffering in this life, and when we accept our Lord Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, we will, and we go to heaven, we will be eternally happy. That's beautiful unto itself. But the Catholic interpretation is we participate in that suffering. And what does St. Paul say? I rejoice in my suffering for your sake, and in my body I make up for what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ for the sake of his body, the church. Pretty bold thing to say there, to make up for what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. So my buddy and I, at a bar before we go salsa dancing, we're talking this, and he's sharing his perspective, and I kind of make a reference to this. No, it got nowhere, but after the fact, when I was reflecting on it, I realized, okay, there is one difference. I would say more of a vibe, a feeling that I got that was different between these two interpretations. And I would totally say our version is more romantic. It's more romantic, like we are doing this together. We're doing this together versus from their perspective, I feel like it's just like he did it, we accept, we get the benefits later on. But for us, it's like a constant daily choice to suffer, to endure our sufferings and carry the other people's other crosses or with Christ to get to heaven. I found it more Romanesque. No, Romanesque is Roman. More romantic.
Well, it is
What do
more
you-
Romanesque because Roman Catholicism, right? So it is more Romanesque.
Amen.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Call
I
me a
think
sucker for being a
there's
romantic, but that's how I would title it. Otherwise, it would just be crazy and sad. Like, why the hell do we suffer constantly? Like, what do I have to prove with it? Like, but if you give me a daily purpose for it, it makes sense to me.
all right.
got
We solved
some.
all the world's problems. That's good.
I got some. So he says, what if I make up for what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ? And you're like, what's lacking, bro? Are you dumb? Like, what are you saying? But he says, for the sake of his body, the church. Who's his body, the church? That's us, right? So the Protestant approach, I feel, can make sense when you take into account the gravity of what Christ has done for us. And it's respectful because they say, what can you add to that? You can't add anything to that. That is God incarnate who has died for your sins and paid the price. You think you could do something about that? Okay, buddy. But one of the things that God did for us, which is already extremely powerful, I mean, is coming into flesh as man, fully God, fully man, right? And by doing so, he's participated in our sufferings, which are uniquely human. And there's not a lot of religions out there where, well, I guess like Greek, Roman, you have gods who have human characteristics, right? But, cast that aside for a moment, you have God, Jehovah, like as understood by Judaism, and being this monotheistic, all-powerful, all-knowing God who is extremely difficult to empathize with, to understand. He is unknowable, right? So a big gift that he gave us was, all right, I'll become man. You know the human experience, right? Well, I'll become a human so you can know the human experience through me. So you can know me through the human experience. Big gift, such a gift, right? Such a blessing. But even there, we know people. I'll go back to what we talked about with like martial arts. We know legends of martial arts, Bruce Lee, of fighters in the UFC who are just prodigies. They are amazing at what they do. You see a clip of their highlights and you can't relate. You cannot relate because they are an upper echelon
and you're hitting your punching bags, and you're like, oh, I want to be like Manny Pacquiao, I want to be like Israel Adesanya, all these people, and you try to copy what they've done, but you are a fraction of the speed that they are. You can't relate. Paul says, I make up for what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ for the sake of his body, the church. Paul is a human. Paul is someone who every Jew could relate to because they knew what it was for someone to be a Pharisee. They knew what it was for someone to be a Christian, as they understood there. Paul had his short, he talks about his short, I talked about the thorn in his side. He's very human in his approach of being a disciple of Christ. He brings himself down a few notches constantly throughout his letters to make himself accessible to us. So the beauty of the Catholic approach is we have not just Christ, we also have saints who have lived the same kind of life we have for the sake of his body, the church. So not that Christ's sufferings is lacking, but perhaps my interpretation right now is I can't understand how Christ was able to withstand the scourging at the pillar. You're looking at the mysteries of the rosary, right? The crowning with thorns, carrying of the cross. You're anticipating a gruesome and terrible death. This is just on a physical level. This is torture. And, asphyxiation on the crucifix. Wow. No, like I don't want that. But can I even conceptualize what it means to die for our sins on top of that? So there's the physical, fully human, and the metaphysical and spiritual, fully God, which is to die for all of our sins, go into hell itself, and rise again. I don't know what happened in hell, but like terrible stuff. So we can't relate, perhaps, to defeating death. We can't relate to going to hell and coming back out of it. Can't do that. But Paul makes up for the lack in suffering by vocalizing to us in a way that we understand and is accessible. What the quality that Christ lacks is not a lack in quality, it's a lack in our ability to understand the things that he's able to do. And to make it accessible is to understand Paul as a human who was flawed, who had to be blinded on the road to Damascus to see Christ. In his suffering, could see Christ. So for us too, it's like, okay, I get you, Paul. I know it sucks to be blind. Like I got sand in my eye once, that was bad. But like, now I understand for the sake of this body of the church, he's saying these things. And now I could be like, I get you, Paul. I get you, Peter. I get you, all the other people who've written in the gospel, and I get the saints even more so now. As far removed as they are from our time, you have this experience of life as a human and of suffering that makes everything make sense.
Dude, totally. You saying all that, it makes me want to ask this question, and I'll give you guys 3 seconds to think about it, because I am totally sure you guys have thought about this question. And again, ladies, this is one weird thing that we as guys do. We just, I think most guys do. If you had to go out somewhere, if you had to die somewhere, it was going to happen, how would you choose to go out?
Martyrdom.
Okay, martyrdom. I would say saving someone's life. That it's just, I don't know. Maybe I watch too many movies. I just think of random scenarios of how I could sacrifice. I don't want to sacrifice. If I can live, I'll live. But if those were the circumstances that I did die trying to save someone's life or saving someone's life, then I will gladly do it. How about you, Chulo?
I would say when I'm in public and I'm in a situation and I'm looking at my surroundings, I'm like, if somebody walks in through that door, I will throw myself at them in order to make sure that nobody else dies. So I'm in a similar boat as you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I only say martyrdom because it's technically, I don't want to say it's cheating, but I hear that's how you get to heaven very, very, very easily.
It's kind of cheating,
explain martyrdom for somebody who doesn't know what martyrdom is.
So if gun to your head, someone says deny Christ or die, I'd be like, nah, and then I'm dead, and then I go to heaven. Very easy.
Did you hear the Columbia or Columbine story where the shooting?
The Columbine,
right?
Yeah, Columbine. Did you believe in God? Yeah.
Yeah, but I heard a speaker say, you know who was the bravest person that day? Was it the first person that was asked, do you believe in God? No, it was the second person. because she knew that she was definitely going to get shot, but she still said, "Yes, I believe in God."
Yeah, and I say this with a grain of salt because, like, I'm talking about a quick death, but that might not be the case. So it might be easier to give my life for somebody else. Because what is it?
No
Um,
greater love.
no greater love than to give your life for a friend, right? So if you're giving the greatest love, it's pretty good. It's pretty good in God's books, so to speak.
Have you watched the movie by Martin Scorsese, Silence? The scene where the Christians are tied up on a cross right at the right on the ocean, and they're basically there for hours getting hit by the waves and burning under the sun, and they eventually end up dying. So yeah, you're right. We think of martyrdom, it's like, man, I want to go like Paul, just behead me, come cut off my head and it's done and it's over. But we don't think about the slow martyrdom that a lot of people unfortunately endure. But it's funny though, because it's a romanticized way of, like Junior, like Papi, you were saying, we romanticize things, but and it is beautiful, but suffering comes along with it in very gruesome ways, unfortunately.
You saying that really warms my heart, because I kind of felt alone when I was saying that. About, it's like we have almost a more romantic way of interpreting suffering, but
Yeah, well, if you look at history, it's very true. And I remember forgot which grade I was in, but we were talking about the American Civil War, and the American Civil War, when it was one of the very first wars when we actually had photography, where we actually had photography, the technology had developed. So before that, when people talked about war, they romanticized it, like, oh yes, going out into battle and dying for my country, and people would hear letters of these soldiers as they're discussing it, but they never knew what they actually went through. It wasn't until the Civil War where that romanticization of war basically came to an end. It was one of the bloodiest battles on American soil, uh, because of the heavy artillery that we had, and we were still doing more classical kind of fighting, like standing up in a line and shooting at each other. But when you have, you know, machine guns shooting at each other, standing in line in front of a gunfire is not the smartest thing to do. So we actually still have the evidence of these pictures of bodies piled up on these fields, and that cut romanticization very quickly. It ended it very quickly.
yeah, I heard that they thought it was going to be something that happened and they'd be home by supper kind of
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, they obviously wasn't like that.
Yeah. And with the pictures out there, everybody got to see what the horrors of war really were.
True.
Yeah.
Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, Matt had to leave for a very important meeting. But we would like to thank him and his life partner to be, Joy, all the way in Canada. We want to say hi while we're here, because I'm sure you're going to watch this episode. We're so thankful for Matt Escaño, thankful for Joy, and Chulo. Your words?
Final thoughts. Just thank you for everyone who watches and listens. And if you're gonna suffer, do it with joy, but embrace it to make you a better person.
And that's why I love these conversations, because not only do we do research on this and try to really figure out to give the best shows, but we really grow. I would say I'm growing as a person while just talking about this. I really am. I find myself more reflective. I find myself catching myself and like, wow, I literally just suggested this last week and I'm not applying it. I should. So Matt's coming back in a couple seconds. And we're going to send you guys off. We are so thankful. Please comment, subscribe, and comment. Write whatever you want to hear for the next show. We're so thankful. We love you. Let's stay in touch. Thank you, Matt, for being part of this show.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
And we'll be in touch, everybody.
Yeah,
All
thanks for having me.
All right.
Any final thoughts? Any final words? We said thank you to you and to Joy. Your future.
Yes.
I'm sure she's gonna watch this.
And congratulations, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I was going to say, for anyone curious, if you want to further explore Stoicism in regards to counseling, it's the foundation for cognitive behavior therapy, REBT therapy. So one of the big ones I'd suggest looking at, Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck. And if you're curious, a very quick way to dealing with what's not in our control are the ABCs of rational emotive behavior therapy. So again, the ABCs of rational emotive behavior therapy. Google that, and you'll see an easy way to look at challenging beliefs that are not helpful to us.
Challenging beliefs that are not helpful to us.
Man.
That could have been another subtitle for this show, because part of suffering, sometimes there's unnecessary suffering.
Yeah.
There's imaginative suffering, where you're worried about the future that you have either no control, or it's just unreasonable that you're suffering for that. Yeah. So with that being said, everybody, thank you so much for being a part of the Papi and Chulo show. I am Papi.
And I am Chulo.
See you next time.